same names. And each of these trunks is going to drain a major region of the body. And so you'll need to know the 5 that we're going to go over. So the 4 paired ones and our 1 unpaired. So we have our jugular trunk that's going to drain the head and neck. The subclavian trunk is going to drain the upper limbs as well as most of the breast. The bronchomediastinal trunks drain the deep thorax. The intestinal trunk is the one that's unpaired. This is just going to drain the gut tract. And last we have our lumbar trunks that are going to drain the lower limbs, as well as the pelvis and the abdominal wall and associated organs. So we'll step through each of these individually. So here are our subclavian trunks. They're going to run adjacent to the subclavian vein. And these again are draining the upper limb and most of the breast. All of our nodes within our arm, as well as some of our more superficial ones in the pectoral region, are going to drain into the deep drainage at these areas called the axillary nodes. So this is an area of high concentration of lymph nodes. They get pushed through the lymph nodes to get into the subclavian trunk.
Do you need to know all of those nodes? Like those individual ones, like pectoral, femoral?
No.
Okay.
No, you don't need to know all of these. You should know that pectoral nodes are going to drain into the axillary nodes, because we'll talk about that again with the superficial drainage. But
at every step there are nodes, because we said that the capillaries go, or vessels go into the nodes as well. So,
yeah.
So from the capillaries to the vessels, trunks to ducts.
So these vessels are connecting these to get up to our lymphatic trunk up here. And so there's a bunch of things flowing together. The actual subclavian trunk will start up here.
Did vessels also go to nodes? Different nodes are everywhere? Nodes are for vessels and for trunks?
Vessels flow through the nodes. The vessels come together to form the trunks. Right, so here are our 2 subclavian trunks. On the left side, it will join with the thoracic duct. On the right side, it will join with the right lymphatic duct. So we'll talk about ducts in a couple minutes. Okay, in the thorax, we have our bronchomediastinal trunks. And these are in charge of doing the majority of the thorax, as well as the medial-most parts of the breast. So we saw some of these lymph nodes involved in the bronchomediastinal drainage when we looked at the lungs. So in the lungs themselves, we have pulmonary nodes. In the hilum of the lung, we have bronchopulmonary nodes or hilar nodes. They'll continue flowing medially from here to inferior and superior tracheobronchial nodes, and then up through the paratracheal nodes into these structures here are our bronchomediastinal trunks. The anterior thoracic wall is also drained here. This is where that drainage from the breast gets in, so these medial parts will drain medially towards the parasternal nodes. And the heart is also drained through this system. So there's a series of different paths that lymph can take from different parts of the heart. Either it can jump onto the trachea and the bronchi, or it can sort of ride up the aorta to get to our bronchomediastinal trunk on the left side. Right, our unpaired trunk is the intestinal trunk, and this is responsible for draining the majority of the gut tube, and this is not bilateral. There's only one intestinal trunk. So the nodes that lead towards the intestinal trunk are all named for the major vessels or organs in this region. So draining the stomach, we have the gastrix along the lesser curvature, and the gastromentals along the greater curvature, just like our blood vessels. We have celiac nodes around the celiac artery, pancreatic nodes around the pancreas, And then we have clumps of nodes that are associated with the superior and inferior mesenterics. That'll be our superior and inferior mesenteric nodes. Alright, so our intestinal trunk in this diagram is just this little short bit here, and that's going to collect all of the lymph from what we call the pre-aortic nodes. So similar to our pre-aortic ganglia that we looked at, it's going to be these nodes that are associated with our 3 unpaired branches of the aorta. And this intestinal trunk is going to drain into this large lymphatic structure here called the cisterna chyli. The cisterna chyli you can think of as the beginning of the thoracic duct. So this structure extending up from it is the thoracic duct, and this is what we saw in the thorax. The location of the cisterna chyli is somewhat variable. It's usually at around L2, but it can be shifted up as high as T12. So just a review exercise, where is it located here in this diagram? Approximately. Where's the lowest part of it?
L1.
L1, right. So this will be L1 here. So this one's running from about L1 to T12. Right, and the intestinal trunk is the one that's going to be draining this fatty liquid called chyle. That's the name cisterna chyli. And then all of the lymph that's going to be distal to this will also contain some of those fatty lipids within it. Yeah.
Can you repeat what you said? So the chyle is in the cisterna chyli?
Well, so the chyle is just any of the lymph that's being drained through here. So any of the stuff that's coming from the gut tube is going to have some of those fats picked up from the intestines. And then that drains into this area, so the cisterna chyli is going to have lymph with chyle in it. Okay, and then our last trunks are called the lumbar trunks. These are in charge of a large region. So the lower limb, the abdominal walls, as well as the kidneys and the suprarenal glands. So these in this diagram, we can see here's our cisterna chyli. This little branch coming over was our intestinal trunk, and these ones coming into it from below are the lumbar trunks. All right, so the limbs that aren't pictured here are going to be drained ultimately through these iliac nodes, which are going to be sitting on those common iliac arteries that we saw in lab. And then from there, they'll flow up through these green ones here are the lumbar trunks, or sorry, the lumbar nodes, and then ultimately up into the cisterna chyli from below. And then the abdominal wall will just be flowing through these lumbar nodes that are on either side of the aorta. Oops, I already said this. So our lumbar trunks are going to drain into the bottom part of the cisterna chyli. The left lumbar trunk actually passes posterior to the aorta to get over to the cisterna chyli. Okay, so we've covered capillaries, vessels, and trunks, and our trunks are ultimately going to flow into our largest structures, which are called ducts. And these ones are pretty easy, yeah.
How does the spleen and thymus connect to that system, or do they not? The spleen and the thymus, do they connect to vessels, or how do they fit in for that?
So they'll be connected both through their own lymph, so I didn't go over the lymphatic drainage of the spleen, but then there's also, they're connected to the blood circulatory system is also attached to this as well. So a lot of structures pass between the two. Okay, so we only have 2 ducts. There's the right lymphatic duct and the thoracic duct. And they do not share equal responsibility for draining the body. So the right lymphatic duct gets the easy job of only doing about a quarter of the body. So the right lymphatic duct is just going to do the right arm, the right half of the head, and much of the right thorax. The thoracic duct drains everything else. So the right lymphatic duct is really short. It's just this little segment from the tip of the arrow down to the vein here. But that's going to receive the bronchomediastinal trunk on the right side, the right subclavian trunk, and the right jugular trunk. After those all come together, it'll attach to this vein here. So it's the juncture between the right subclavian and the right internal jugular vein. And this is also called the right venous angle. So this juncture between the two is a venous angle. So we have a right and a left venous angle. The thoracic duct, on the other hand, is really long. So we saw it way down here in the thorax. It starts at the cisterna chyli, and remember the cisterna chyli was where the lumbar and intestinal trunks drained. As it gets up to where it will eventually rejoin the venous circulation, it'll pick up the left jugular, left bronchomediastinal, and left subclavian trunks. Since the cisterna chyli is in the abdomen, we need to pass up into the thorax. And the thoracic duct is going to follow the aorta through the aortic hiatus to get from the abdomen up into the thorax. Then it runs through the posterior mediastinum. So this was where we saw it, sitting kind of in between the azygos vein and the aorta. While it's going through here, it'll pick up lymph from a bunch of vessels that don't drain into their own trunk. So these posterior mediastinal nodes are just going to drain directly over into the thoracic duct without going through a trunk along the way. And finally, it gets up into the superior mediastinum. And here it will loop around the left jugular vein and drain into the left venous angle here. And so the connection point of our two ducts here tells us something about how the lymph is going to flow in here. Why does lymph actually flow when it's not being pumped by anything? And so rather than being pumped, it's being driven by changes in pressure. So these areas here at the angles are areas of extreme low pressure because we have blood flowing down this way towards the heart. And since it's flowing away from this point, it's going to create a slight vacuum there, which will be pulling the lymph out of the lymphatic ducts into the bloodstream. So sort of a siphoning function here. Does that make sense to everyone? Sort of. Yeah. So have you ever siphoned something? Like so if you put a hose in something and you suck the water out through the hose and then you let it go, the water will continue to flow out because there's low pressure on the one side that's pulling fluid from the other side. So as the blood is rushing past this point, it's going to create a little pocket of low pressure here. So if we attach another vessel to it, that low pressure will pull the fluid out of the lymphatic system. So the pressure here will be lower than the pressure in the lymphatic vessels.
Sounds good.
Right, is that a little better? Okay. Okay, so we'll finish up by talking a little bit about superficial lymphatic drainage. So our deep drainage pretty much follows the major blood vessels, except for the parts that followed along the airway. But the superficial is not like that at all. So the superficial drainage is totally independent of the way blood flows through these regions of the body. And we can break the body into three main zones divided by these two transverse planes. So the transverse clavicular plane will run pretty much right along the clavicles, and that'll separate the head and neck from the thorax and the arms. And then the transumbilical plane will separate the thorax from the abdomen and the legs. So we won't talk about the head and neck because that will get its own lecture later on. But in the thorax and the arms, these red arrows are going to give us sort of our direction of drainage. So we have our pectoral nodes over here. So areas in the lower part of your thorax will drain up towards your pectoral nodes. And then the pectoral nodes will drain laterally and deep into the axillary nodes. And then from the axillary nodes, they eventually get into the subclavian trunks. The middlemost part will drain medially towards the peristernal nodes, and the peristernal nodes, remember, are connected to the bronchomediastinal trunks. And then for the abdomen and legs, everything is going to drain either down from the abdomen or up from the legs, and maybe around from the back towards the front, into the superficial inguinal nodes. And these superficial inguinal nodes will then drain deep to the deep inguinal nodes, which will then drain through a series of other nodes to eventually get to our lumbar trunks. All right, any questions about superficial drainage? No, okay, that's it for what you need to know about the lymphatic system for this class.
Folks, a couple of simple announcements. As last time, we're giving you the pleasure of putting together your own practice exam. So I have put numbered cards on each table. So each table will grab some pins and identify who's